Hey, welcome everybody. Eric Dryman here with the Hooks and Hoses podcast. I want to thank everybody for tuning in. This is the March 2026 episode. I'm really pleased to have my guest this month, Jay Bonnifield from Everett, Washington. Going to be my guest this month. We're going to talk about his article from December in Fire Engineering Magazine covering ReCio. Jay, welcome to the podcast.
Hey, Eric, thank you very much for having me, man. It's looking forward to it. And yeah, I appreciate the opportunity to come on and chat about ReCio.
Yeah, it's a great topic. So before we get going, Jay, just tell the audience about yourself, how you got into the fire service, how long you've been on the job, your assignments, just kind of lay that groundwork out for everybody.
Sure. Yeah, so I've been on the job 16 or 17 years, somewhere in there. Spent the bulk of my career on the tailboard, and during that time I was really fortunate to be able to kind of learn from just a lot of really awesome mentors, both on my job and then in some of the surrounding areas. We've got up in the Pacific Northwest, we're pretty blessed to have we got the Aaron Fields and Scott and Casey Corrigan, and we've just got like Tori Tollfree. We've got like all these people that are just phenomenal resources to learn from, and so if you plug in, there's a lot of knowledge there, and I was able to kind of plug in with some of those folks early and really get a good foundation in engine company work. So yeah, when I promoted, what has it been, 4 or 5 years ago now, something like that. And yeah, I didn't really set out. I was really enjoying my time on the tailboard and didn't really have a ton of aspiration to move up. And then, it kind of decided one of my buddies talked me into taking a test, and it's like, I don't know about that. And so I ended up taking the test, and then my like competitive side hit. If I'm going to take a test and compete, then I'm going to go all in on it. And once I started going all in, I started acting a little bit and really fell in love with doing the job in the right seat. And so I got promoted, and man, it's been a blast. I'm signed to an engine company that is just, I couldn't ask for more. And the station, the shift, the crew, everything that I have is it makes showing up to work really fun. So we're busy. We go to a lot of fires. We have a lot of fun. Everybody just gets along well, train a ton. We got a battalion chief that's just, as good as it gets. And our battalion chief that just retired, and our new one that just got promoted, like they're A++ battalion chief. So, life's good. And, but yeah, outside of that, yeah, I'm a husband. My wife Tess and I, we've been together since high school, and so a long time. And we got 4 kids together, and yeah, that's kind of the main thing. When I'm not at work, I'm running around to lacrosse games and wrestling matches and soccer games, and all that stuff. So that's kind of the stuff that comes first before the fire service, and trying to just, follow Christ, be a great husband, be a great father. And that's kind of where it's at for me. And then the fire service is just an awesome, like icing on the cake.
Yeah, well, that's great. And it sounds like you got your priorities straight, and that's good. Did you have how did you get into the fire service? Did you have family? Did you just see an ad? I mean, did you always have a hankering for it? I mean,
No, my family, don't have any family fire service history or anything like that. Most of my family that's not in jail are in the trades. And so, I was kind of heading down one of those routes, and luckily I got into the auto shop and started kind of, turning wrenches and stuff. And then, I think really what drew me to the fire service was I was really missing, sports were my life growing up, and I loved being a part of a team. And when that started to kind of wind down, and I was, heading off to go do life, working in a shop was fun, but there was something missing. And I think the thing that was really missing for me was the, teamwork, the the locker room atmosphere, like all that stuff, being able to go out and compete and do like hard, challenging things with a group of folks that are like kind of like-minded. And so the fire service kind of just presented itself and filled that void. And yeah, the rest is history. So
Yeah, we've all got our story about how we got our start, right? Everybody's just a little different. So, but
yeah.
the main thing is we all landed in the best job in the world. So, at least
Yeah.
in our eyes, it's the best job in the world. So.
I always laugh at, like one of my good buddies that I did a lot of time with on our, um, when you first get out of the academy or you first get off probation, a lot of times you'll get assigned real quick to an aid car or something like that. So one of my aid car partners right out of the gate was a guy. He's got like a master's in finance and all sorts of crazy stuff. And I barely graduated high school, and I'm sitting there and I looked at him one day and he's talking about all of his schooling and everything. And I just laughed and I smiled and I go, and here we are, we're just riding around the same ambulance together. And it's kind of fun how it works out. So
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. Well, as I mentioned earlier, you wrote this article that came out in December in Fire Engineering on the value of RECEO. Um, ReCio has been around a long time, since the
mhm.
1950s. It was Lloyd Lehman is credited with creating it. What was your motivation, or what was the impetus for the article? What brought it back? Why ReCio, that's 60, 70 years old? Why,
Yeah.
why, why did you write the articles?
Well, so kind of like we were talking about before we were on air there, whenever I teach or write, like those teaching and writing to me are things that they help me stay sharp. And so I don't do them because I want to get my name out there or anything like that. I do them because they challenge me in where I'm at to be able to grow and to be able to kind of like steel man why I do what I do, or to change, I go down a road and maybe I'm wrong and maybe I need to change, but I'm not going to know that unless I kind of like pull those threads longer. And so teaching and writing are ways that help challenge me as for growth. And so part of where the ReCio stuff came from was, in my growth as a company officer. And I'm getting to that, it's not like I've been doing it for a long time, but where there's so much turnover to where I've had a couple of guys now come in that like drove for me or were on the tailboard or on one of the rigs in my station that I'm kind of, you know, a part of my crew, where I'm getting them ready for their journey as company officers, right? They're taking a test, they're studying, and they're kind of asking me for help. Like, hey, how do you, um, like, what's your system? Basically, what's your framework is kind of what it comes down to. Like, how do you operate? And they're trying to like pull. And so I got to dive in and go like, okay, well, how do I do this? Because I know there's this thing called the tacit knowledge transfer problem, which is like basically boiled down to, how to ride a bike, but can you teach somebody how to ride a bike? And there's a lot of stuff that you're trying to convey to a person. You're like, I don't know exactly how to describe it, but I know it when I see it.
Yeah.
And so trying to like break that down so I could actually describe it to somebody. And really what it came down to was ReCio was firmly kind of imprinted upon me early. And it just made sense, and I didn't know why it made sense. And so I had to kind of go into this process of, okay, why does it make sense versus some of the other acronyms and all that kind of stuff? Why do those just not hit, but this one does? This one makes sense. It makes the fire ground clearer to me. It makes the hierarchies and the decisions that I need to make more clearly. And so that's really kind of where the article came from, was my process in trying to help myself and other people understand how to build a framework that they're going to look at the fire ground through.
That's certainly a valid reason to do it. I can agree with the idea of writing and teaching. It certainly makes you a better firefighter. The goal is to help other people, but at the same time, you're helping yourself a lot. I know I feel that way when I teach or present somewhere. It's always a learning opportunity for me. And I am, by the way, a big fan of ReCio myself. It's what I've been doing this a little bit longer than you. So when
Mm-hmm.
I first came on, that all there was, there was ReCio, right? There wasn't wasn't even Lovers U. There wasn't slicers, dicers, any of this other stuff that's out there now. So, and I've, for the same reasons, a lot of the same things that you mentioned. I've been a big fan of it as well, and currently in my current role as a battalion chief, I rely on it a lot when I'm making decisions, even if I don't necessarily think about it. I'm doing a lot of the same things that ReCio stands for in my thought process when I'm running an incident. So, you mentioned in the article, ReCio shouldn't be treated as a linear checklist. You should, there might be things happening simultaneously, right? It's not one thing. It's not do one, then do the next, do the next. And for those that aren't familiar with ReCio stands for rescue, exposures, confinement, extinguishment, and overhaul, right? So rather than doing those things in linear order, we all know, those of us that have a little bit of time and have been to a few fires understand that normally things have to happen simultaneously. We're making rescues while we're extending a line, or we're, all the different things. Things have to take place at once. So, how should firefighters think about and apply it to a fast-moving fire scene when there's a lot going on? You might be getting pulled 4 or 5 different directions, particularly departments that are all engine departments, don't really have a truck culture or a truck mindset, or you're just short staffed, right? You got 5 guys, 6 guys pulling up to an incident. How would you um, suggest people address those things and apply it to a fast moving fire ground?
Well, so one of the things, and this kind of like dovetails a little bit with the question prior, but one of the things I really like about ReCio, or that I've found helpful with it, is that it's scalable to the position. So it's just as useful to the firefighter as it is to the battalion chief, or whoever's running the scene. It may look a little bit different for those positions. So like the battalion chief, when you're looking at you're looking at kind of those 30,000 foot level, big picture stuff of, the rescue profile of the building or the buildings with exposures, like you're looking at this kind of holistic view of the fire ground, versus a tailboarder is looking at the specific, attack corridor and the specific like bedrooms to target and all, like they're looking at rescue a little bit more granular. And that company officer obviously is looking at, kind of a blend of the two of those, and then being able to be like that point guard and being able to just, help distribute crews to the next most needed area. And so, ReCio from that perspective, it helps create those frameworks for each one of those positions where everybody is thinking about, the life safety component first, and the most critical. The way I find best to describe it is, rescue doesn't stand for imminent rescue. It's the critical life ways of the building, and so that a lot of time in residential buildings and houses. And so this gets down to, you got to understand, and this is something I was taught early on, was you got to understand fire behavior, building construction, and capabilities and limitations of your gear, equipment, and your people, and your kind of tactical deployment model there. And so those are like your big 3 things that you need to make good decisions. Well, if you take like single family residents and multifamily residents, there's a lot of really good data, firefighter rescue survey, and all sorts of these different data points that are going to help us be able to identify what are the critical life ways of the building. UL in the multifamily study harped on over and over and over again the importance of the common stairwells and common hallways, right? And there's a ton of data there about, CO accumulation in those spaces, and the need to be able to get lines into those spaces, and open flowing hand lines and ventilation, their ability to be able to influence the common areas, right? The rescue survey with house fires, you've got 72% of victims are found from the front door, through the foyer, through the down into the family room area, down the hallway to the bedroom. Like if you cover that space with one hose line, you're covering like 72% of the areas we find victims in a house, right?
Mhm.
And so it's not just this linear checklist of, you know, it showing up, looking at it and going, okay, there's no people that are visible, check, rescue is checked. That's not how we use or how we should use RECEO. And I think that this gets back into like why some other acronyms just don't click for me. And if they do for other people, great. But just for me, this one seems to click a lot more, which is because the intent behind the acronym and how it was designed, what it was designed for, makes a big difference. If it was designed to be used in a linear fashion, then you don't have the bandwidth on scene when you show up to something that's a fast moving apartment fire. You got people jumping off balconies on the backside, and you got fire you got to knock down. You got to get the truck company in the backside with the ladders. Like you don't have time to sit there and go through a checklist, and nor should you, right? But what something like ReCio allows you to do is when you are training, you're using ReCio as your framework to work through a building. So when you show up to that fire, it's intuitive for you. So you look at and you, in a training environment, how we do this is like through tactical decision game processes. We do them for about 15 minutes at the start of every single shift. Pull-up scenarios, and we go like seat by seat, roll by roll. All throughout our crew, there's 8 guys in the station. We go, every single one of us, based on our assignment for the day, and we are looking at the building, looking at the fire, and making, here's what I would do, and we're processing that out loud individually so that we can all kind of be on the same page and build that continuity. And so with ReCio, I start out, I show up to that apartment fire, and I'm first going, like, yes, are there people in imminent danger? That's part of it. But the next thing is the fire in the ways of the building, stairways, hallways, entryways, like those ways that are the critical lifelines for people to be able to get in and out of that building. They're also the critical life ways fire likes to spread. And then you go into the exposures, which, we'll talk about, I'm sure, later. But exposures doesn't mean the exterior exposures. It can, but more often than not, it's interior exposures, the way the fire is going to want to move throughout the building. And then if you can identify that real quick, that kind of tells you what you need for confinement. And then extinguishment and overhaul follow. And I've got kind of like more granular level, kind of like zoom in, we make the fire room, how we extinguish the fire, how we overhaul it. But ReCio just kind of methodically works from the arrival and the size up all the way through the end of the fire in a really clear hierarchy that's easy for everybody to understand, that we're going to fight fire in a way that's going to do the greatest amount of good for the most amount of people. We're going to establish lines, and not just one line, but potentially multiple lines in quick succession to be able to confine it. We're going to aggressively ventilate and try to get this building to change over conditions-wise really fast, so that we can increase the ability for people basically increase our timeline to be able to find people. Search is the highest priority on residential buildings, and so we're coming at it from which ReCio fits. Like when rescue and life is the number one thing in ReCio, like search is our number one priority when we get to the fire ground. Even as an engine company, that doesn't mean I'm searching. That means I'm fighting fire in a way that is supporting the search. And if my engine company, from the company officer to the driver to the firefighters, everybody, if we all are on the same page that we are there for the search and to support the search and to enhance the search and to make their life easier, to protect them, to, hydraulically ventilate post knockdown so that they can continue to increase their search speed. Like, that's our job, is to support the search. So I think ReCio really ties that all together really well.
I think it does too. And thanks for that explanation. I recently was with a group of people who were doing an investigation into some injuries that occurred at a fire, and one of the other people on the committee made the point, and I thought it was very poignant. And we think about the attack line or the hand line that's stretched, the first hand line stretched into a building. We think we're fire attack, right? We call ourselves attack, when we contact command or whatever. But really, the primary responsibility of that hose line is to protect survivable space and protect those common areas, right? Certainly, our goal is to ultimately, if you're on the engine companies, to put out the fire. But some people, I think, they think they've just got to go straight to the seat of the fire, put the fire out, while they might be potentially compromising survivable space or some of those common areas that the search team needs to occupy in order to either confirm there are victims or confirm there aren't victims, in the structure. So that's very poignant the way you explained it. So I appreciate that.
Yeah.
To kind of dovetail onto that, everybody knows that these fire scenes are fast moving. You're saturated with information, whether it's from your senses, whether it's commands that are being told to you by your company officer, or from the battalion chief to the company officer. You get very potentially task overloaded, sensory overloaded very quick. You mentioned in the article about recognition prime decision making, or RPDM. Another one of my favorite topics is RPDM. I've done a little bit of research on it on my own, trying to learn more about it and how airplane pilots do it and all those other sorts of things, and how I can translate that into the job we do on the fire ground. But how does ReCio help build the mental patterns that you need for ReCio versus the classic analytical process of assessing a situation?
So you kind of have, and there's a lot of neuroscience that you can geek out on and really head down a deep rabbit hole here. But to kind of like sum it up succinctly, we're constantly the way that our brains kind of process information and make decisions and stuff like that and analyze things. You've got, and this is work. If you've ever read the book Thinking Fast and Thinking Slow by Daniel Kahneman, he talks a lot about system 1, system 2 brain, which just to distill it down is you've got your fast paced, more like your fast-paced processing and your like slower, more methodical, effortful side. Well, there's pros and cons, and it's not that either one of them is totally on and the other one's totally off. It's which one is being kind of drawn from more. And so the more dynamic a situation is, the more we're going to have, the more our brains are going to operate in that that kind of fast pace where we're not necessarily, it's more intuition guiding us. Right. And that's where like it ties in with the, Gary Klein's work with RPDM, where, he found in his studies that fireground decision makers, less than 12% of the time are they making a conscious, effortful comparison between a couple of tasks. Right. So you see this building on fire, and kind of the way that it works out, you show up, you got, apartment building that's just ripping fire, people, chaos, all that kind of stuff. That's a chaotic situation. And you're looking at that building, and your kind of baseline operating framework is going to end up telling you what is and is not important, because there's all of these things competing for your attention, but not all of them are. But what your brain is trying to do is figure out what is the most important thing right now. Right? Like because I can't do all of it, but what is the most important thing I can do right now? And so this is where, ReCio really helps establish a clear hierarchy of what is the most important thing that I can do right now. And I'll talk about kind of how I, practice that. But the more, the more unfamiliar a situation is, the more you're going to want to slow down, the more you're going to be operating in that more effortful, conscious decision-making side. And this is a lot of times where a battalion chief should be, is they should be more on that side of things. They should be, comparing, contrasting some of the decisions. When they hear, engine 6 is going to do, X, Y, and Z, they're kind of sitting there and being like, okay, does that make sense? Should, what are the fallout? What are the repercussions of that potentially? Like they're right, which that's that slower, more methodical, like effortful thinking process that the company officer who's trying to hump hose and trying to, get stuff coordinated, and he's got his guy engaged with a firefight, like he's not able to do that because it's such a dynamic kind of sensory overload environment. And so it's really important that we understand that it's not, we can't just sit there and tell people who are engaged with the fire, that they just need to think more. Because honestly, that's just not how the human brain is wired. And if we do that, you don't get something for nothing. So when you tell somebody, which there's a time to kind of go pedal down, and there's a time to slow down, right? And like wisdom on the fireground is knowing when to put the pedal down and get after it and when to slow it down, and so that starts with, I think, right out of the gate, differentiating between residential and commercial fires, where, true residential to true commercial, where on true residential fires, the building construction's in our favor, the compartmentalization of the building's in our favor, our ability to be able to get in and get after it and overwhelm the fire with our hand lines and all that kind of stuff, that is in our favor. And so our ability to be able to bring that fire under control really quickly, if we're, pretty aggressive about it, is very much in our favor. The question is, that RPD, like, have we built enough pattern recognition based on building types to be able to go, hey, here's what normal is on a house fire, right? On a house fire, if it's in the basement, if it's below grade, if it's an exterior fire that, the back deck torched off and it's not into the house quite yet, if it's we've got hoarding conditions, we've got wind driven conditions, we've got, significant forcible entry challenges, like something that's going to cause us to call an audible, we have to tell them what normal is first. So then we can actually tell, here's the things that are like the watch out situations that can cause us to call an audible. And here's what the audible is, right? And so we can rep that out. Like I said, the TDGs we do every morning, you can throw up a house fire where, fire's in the basement, and guys key in on trace the smoke to the lowest level is the ground, it's lower. Okay, awesome. Fire's in the basement. We want to fight a basement fire on plane instead of diving the chimney with the first line if we don't have to, because that's if it's got exterior access, we want to use it if possible. It can cause us to deviate from that first line, just going right in over the top of it and dropping down. Sometimes we have to, though, because we have true basements without exterior access. We've got to be prepared for that play as well. And so we can rehearse that. Well, that creates a slide in everybody's slideshow, or it creates that RPD imprint, so that when they see that in the field, they're like, oh, that's not normal. This is what we do about it, right? And you just build that out based on building type in your area. Apartment fires, we separate them to exterior access and interior common hallway types. We've got there's some nuance in how we handle both. But the main thing is we prioritize the engine company protecting the ways of the building, and the first truck company going, being very search centric. But then when we separate to commercial fires, we go, okay, this is where we slow it down. This is where we really focus on, I want heavy handed, like 2.5 or potentially greater. We want to be able to get line of sight as quickly as possible. On the seat of the fire, we are, keeping everybody together on the line. We're double stacking up engine companies to be able to support the advance in. Truck companies are shifting, instead of more search centric, they're switching to more vent and recon centric, where they can start getting our engine companies supporting our advance to the seat of the fire, because the focus now has shifted in those environments to, let's get quickest, easiest line of sight kill shot to the seat of the fire that we can. And that can come through a roll up door, a man door, any side of the building, right? Versus a residential building where we're really focused on dominating the highest impact areas for civilian life and searchable space, right? And so they're kind of two separate mind shifts, but they require us on the commercial side to really slow the tempo down, because the worst thing that can happen on that is we can get one of our guys lost in a big box, smoke filled environment, call a mayday, and now everything goes into chaos, right? And so we're kind of separating the two of those there, and making, and that just that clear separation of letting guys know when to put the pedal down versus when to slow it down, increases our safety a ton, and it keeps everybody on the same page. And it allows those slides and those slideshows, that RPD imprint to be able to be a lot more readily accessible for them in chaotic environments, because it's just impossible to expect somebody to go down this checklist in those type of environments. And what you sacrifice is you are sacrificing significant amounts of time. And you're not becoming more accurate in your decision. People think that you can solve the whole problem from the cab. Like you can have this size up process where you arrive and you just look at the building and you just instantly know all of the ways. Like that's not always possible to be able to just solve the entire problem from the cab. On a house fire, sure, house fires are easy. We can all probably show up to a house fire and it's like bowling with the guardrails up, right? House fires are usually pretty easy. Now you start increasing the complexity of the building, right, and getting into your center hallway apartments and all that kind of stuff. Well, now there's a lot more unknown from the cab, and so really what I want to do is I want to make a decision, call the play based on what I see, get the ball rolling, and then I'm going to find out more, and I can always pivot along the way. And I can always change, we can, as we find out more information, we can always pivot, but I got to get to work. And so if I've got this like lengthy process of trying to go down these checklists, and then I check the box, and then I just throw it out of my mind and I move on from it, I'm not analyzing that information in an ongoing way, meaning that I'm going to miss things. And so the whole point is to get the ball rolling and then find out more information along the way and communicate that, so that if you need to change course, if you find out something that's going to cause you to pivot, then great, get that out on the radio so that we can make the change and we can stick our foot in the ground and go.
Mm-hmm. So to follow up on that, many people in the fire service today, they aren't going to fires every day. They might go to a handful of fires a year, if depending upon where they work. Developing RPDM can be a challenge if you don't know how to do it. I assume you would agree. Do you feel, how much of an impact do you feel that those tactical decision talks that you mentioned earlier that you have with your crews help to build that? And then the other thing is, how much of the RPDM model do you feel like you can kind of get ahead of or front load by having conversations with the people that you're working with about, hey, if we go to a center hallway apartment, we're going to pull this line instead of that line. If we're going to a commercial fire, because I think that you would probably agree the default for many of us, many firefighters across the country, is we go to way more house fires than we do commercial fires or high-rise fires or whatever else, right? So if we don't have those conversations ahead of time and think about those things and kind of build that muscle memory or mental memory, however you want to refer to it, we're going to default to the lowest common denominator, which is an 1 3/4 hand line, and those, not leaving room for the truck, not thinking about bringing us, equipment that a truck might need for a commercial building versus a residence. So just talk a little bit about how you kind of develop that, particularly whether it was in yourself or in other people that you're kind of mentoring, bringing them along when they don't have the amount of fireground experience that other people might have.
Yeah. So everybody starts out with a baseline of we want to be effective and we want to be safe, right? Like those two things aren't mutually exclusive. I want to come home to my family. I want my guys to go home to their families. And we also want to be effective, right? And those two things are not, sometimes they get pitted against each other, and it's not either or, it's yes and so we should strive to be effective and do so. And this is like Dave LeBlanc has a quote that he got along the way, that our job is to be effective and to do so as safely as possible. And I think that sums up, kind of one of the ways that we can start that conversation with people is that we want both of these things, because sometimes you get you'll start talking tactics, and really what it boils down to when guys are arguing is they're arguing, one guy saying, hey, we need to be safe, and the other guy's like, we need to be effective. And they're arguing about, the difference between the two, and really you can do both at the same time. So the question is how. Well, right out of the gate, separating the residential and commercial tactics, tempos, all of that kind of stuff is crucial for an engine company, because the things that can the definition of being effective on both of those fires is different. The definition of being effective on a residential fire is to support the search, to control, to improve, to be able to get a hand line on the fire or multiple hand lines on the fire, to protect the ways of the building, to support the surge, to decrease temperatures, to bring in oxygen, the open and flowing hand line, all of that kind of stuff. On a commercial building, the definition of effectiveness for an engine company is going to be really rooted in our ability to confine the fire. It's at that point, the building is big, and we're talking about big uncompartmentalized spaces and all that kind of stuff. And the search priority on those buildings is a lot different than it is on a residential building, right? And so on a commercial building, what we're really focused on is getting that quick kill shot to the seat of the fire through the most direct, easiest, cleanest route possible. And ventilating to support that advance and all that kind of stuff. Well, if we separate those two off the bat, then we're keeping our people safe, but we're also giving them the definition of what effectiveness is on those buildings, right? And so you start by separating out your building types in your area. And we're going to be like, in my area, we don't have high rise in my still area. We have a lot of low and mid rise. We run about 70% of our fires are multifamily fires. We run a few house fires, but predominantly multifamily and kind of like lighter commercial, right? And so we kind of break those buildings down. We've got our house fire, our exterior access apartment fire, our interior public hallway apartment fires. We've got our strip malls, concrete tilt-ups, brick and mortar commercial, like townhomes. We've got kind of here's the play for each one of those, right? And then within each one of those is, here's the things in those building types that can jam us up, and here's what we do about them, right? And they're pretty easy to predict, those things, if you start thinking about each one of those building types. Like, classic on a strip mall is going to be that overhang, that common void overhang, that you got to make sure that you don't commit an engine company through underneath that facade that's going to drop on them, right? Like, that's pretty predictable. That's pretty well known in the fire service that hey, if we show up to a strip mall that's rocking, we've got common attic space in the cock loft, we've got the exposure units, and we've got that thing that we need to make sure we don't commit an engine company to, where it's going to drop on us. And this riddle of, can you be safe without being effective versus can you be effective without being safe? And what I would say to that is, you can be so safe to the point that you're not effective, but you can't be effective without being safe. And like that, so the goal is to be effective and to stay effective. And in order to do that, we got to keep ourselves from being in a position that we're going to end up having to call a mayday. That doesn't mean don't call a mayday, but it's something that, like, Scott Corrigan I think he puts it really well, that as soon as we get ourselves in a position where we have to call a mayday, now the whole fire ground shifts towards us, right? As it should. But let's try to look at the things in each one of those building types that are foreseeable, that can get us jammed up, that we know have been problems historically in the fire service, and here's what to do about them, so that we don't end up having to call a mayday, so that we can stay effective, right? Because that's the goal, is to stay effective. So I think that's one of the ways you got to start breaking each one of those building types down. We use the tactical decision process in, every morning. And the whole goal is like 1% better every day, right? We're really busy. We don't have the ability to go out there and drill for hours every day. Like if we get 30 minutes of drill time in a day, that's a really good day for us. That's kind of our goal. And so our baseline is get a 15-minute tactical decision game where we're all together at breakfast while we're, drinking coffee and eating, get 15 minutes there, and then try to go stretch hose for 30 minutes. And, if we get that, everything else is extra, but that's kind of what we strive for every day. And with those TDGs, what we're doing is we're taking a building type, and within that building, so I'll show like a townhome fire. And if I show a townhome fire right now and you were watching my crew, I'd pull up the townhome fire, put it on the TV, everybody's eating breakfast. I go, okay, what do we got? And you're gonna hear, and we just go by riding position. Starts with me. It always starts with me. I say, hey, we got a townhome. The play is, and the fire's doing this. Here's what our play is going to be. Boom, boom, boom. And then we go to the driver, and the driver's going to say, okay, townhome fire. I know we got to get a horizontal standpipe. This is what we call it, 2.5 to 1.75 inches. I know that the stretch is going to be 200 feet plus of 1.75 inches because the stairs are straight run. They run front to back. Then you got to circle around front to back. So they're going to eat up 200 feet of hose minimum for the townhome. And so he's going to assist with the stretch, and then I'm going to go, okay, what's your water supply plan? All right, well, hydrant's right behind me. I'm going to overhaul, or I'm going to tell the second in engine I'm operating off tank, blah, blah, blah. Right. And then pipeman. All right, what are you doing? Here's the line I'm pulling. Here's the amount of hose I'm pulling, the size. Here's where I'm going to. Here's what I'm expecting. If I see this, I'm going to pivot to this. Great. Aid car, what are you guys doing? Aid car, we treat like a mini search or mini truck company. They go right to here's where we're searching. We're going to help the line get in place. We're branching off. We're going to search here and here first, then followed by this and this. Medic unit, we've got 2 firefighter paramedics on the ALS ambulance in our station. Hey, if we get a victim, here's what this is going to look like. Here's the removal plan. If we get multiple, here's the pivot for multiple victims, and boom. That's the tactical decision game for the day, right? Mm-hmm. And so we go, each guy on the crew is making a decision and we kind of hear collectively like the things that are important that guy's keying in on. And so if somebody isn't keying in on something, but they hear the driver say, I'm watching this thing spread with the wind. It's kicking it down the road to the south here. And so I know we need a different engine company coming from the other side. It kind of loops everybody in on like, oh yeah, he's right. We're going to need some confinement down that our engine company can't handle. Maybe we're not in a great position for that. Right. And so we're able to kind of feed off of each other a little bit with this process here by rehearsing it, and we do a different building type every day, and sometimes it's a house, and sometimes it's a common hallway apartment, sometimes it's a concrete tilt up, right? And there's like certain triggers with each one of those that here's the play and here's the audibles for if we find X, Y, and Z. And it's kind of creating that hive mind. And then we go out and we pull hose. When we go pull hose on those buildings, we pull hose based on the play, right? We don't just show up and just start stripping hose off the rig. We go, okay, this is a 4-story center hallway apartment, and we got that unit on fire. And so we're pulling the line. Okay, here's the first line. And then we want everybody thinking center hallway means we're going to need more than one line. Where's the second line going? That way it builds the muscle memory for us also if we're second due. Or if we're a later arriving engine company on that type of fire, we see the first line going into place and we know we can support them getting into place and where our line's going to have to get to help with confinement. And so anyway, so that's kind of how we build via the tactical decision game process. That's kind of how we build that RPD imprint on all of our guys. And it's super fast. I mean, it has increased our ability because we've got a lot of turnover with, hiring and all that kind of stuff. We get a lot of probationary firefighters. It's really easy for us over the course of a month to be able to get them basically dialed in on all of our plays and all of our audibles within that month. And it doesn't take a ton of time. You just have to be smart about it.
What you just described, and there's a lot of information in this podcast today. But what you just described, if every fire department did what you just described for 15 minutes a day, there would be a lot more efficient fire departments in the country.
Yeah.
We often want to consider ourselves professionals, and many of us are. Many people are doing the right things. But what you just described is what every professional sports team does every week when they say, hey, the Colts are playing the Seahawks this weekend. We know so-and-so likes to run this particular route, or they do more passing than they do running, or vice versa, or whatever. And they talk through those scenarios, right? It's no different, right? You see videos and watch movies about the military, particularly the special operations teams, where they do those walkthroughs and they do those drive runs, and you see videos of the Blue Angels, and they're doing these mental, I'm going to do a turn this way, and I'm going to do a flip, and I'm going to do, and they walk through all this stuff in order to make themselves less likely to make a mistake when they're in the midst of actually doing whatever they're training for, right? And I do think that there's a lot of value in that, and I appreciate you sharing that, because hopefully, if people aren't doing it now, hopefully they'll embrace that and start doing some of that with their own crews. So to kind of dovetail into that, you're talking about front loading things, and you also mentioned in the article about building intuition, but you can't really build into intuition without reflection. So just talk about that for a little bit with the audience. How are you doing that? How are you building that intuition through reflection?
One of the things I noticed really early on in my career was the fire service values experience a lot, right? And then which is great, because experience is extremely valuable. But what I also noticed was, you can have, go on a fire and you've got whatever 30, whatever your deployment is on that fire. Like, say it's 35 guys on that fire, right? Well, that's 35 different perspectives. And when you are engaged in a dynamic environment, it's well documented. There's audio exclusion. There's time distortion. There's going to be all sorts of these factors that are just like human factors that are part of being human. Sometimes 60 seconds can either feel like the blink of an eye or an eternity, depending on what you're doing and the environment you're in, right? And so the hot wash it became really important, because there's a lot of gold to be mined out of there, and you can hot wash tactical decision games, or you should, but like trainings and going to fires and all that kind of stuff. You're losing all of that experience, or the impact that experience can have, if you don't collect it at the end while it's fresh. And so one thing that I think my department does a really good job of is, we have a lot of guys with a lot of experience, and we really go to great lengths to try to pull that. Like, we have an officer forum, and where our company officers get together. We're, I don't know, 200, I think our department's about 220 folks or so, somewhere in there. And so our company officers, they quarterly, we get together and we run through calls of consequence, where guys are out there, they'll run whatever apartment fire that ran up 3 floors of the building, and they, like the other day, that guys on my station, different shift, they had 3 floors of fire, and they had 7 grabs that they made out of that one, right? And so that one will be one of the ones we talk about, where the first company officer, he'll be able to go in and go, hey, here's what I saw, here's what we did, here's what I liked, here's what I didn't, here's what I'd change, right? And so just and we don't have to take forever breaking down every little part of this, but we need the kind of the high notes of, why'd you make your decisions the way you did, and would you do anything different? What'd you see? What'd you feel? What'd you hear? those kind of things, so that those can get passed on. They're all kind of making imprints on everybody's head of oh, I like that, or oh, maybe we could tweak that, or whatever. but experience doesn't matter if you keep it all to yourself, right?
Mhm.
And also, you can have multiple experiences on the same fire. I can experience something as an engine company on, this floor, and that this engine company is like they polar opposites, and we're on the same fire. And so it's really important that we're able to compare and contrast those things, because being able to pull like true cause and effect relationships out of a fire, say like I did this and this happened because I did this. It's really tough because we've got, it's one rep. We don't know all the factors of the building and the fire that made it happen that way. So we got to be really careful of that. We don't have all the perspectives. It's not a scientific environment, but there is a lot of really good stuff that we can pull out of it, themes and patterns and all that kind of stuff. But we have to do a hot wash. So there's the instant hot wash right after, pulling all that stuff out while it's fresh, and then there's the ongoing kind of, hey, it's settled now that I've had some time to reflect on it. Here's some of the things maybe I would have done differently on that, or here's why now I think I know better why I did this. So we have to get in the habit of doing those hot washes regularly and making everybody a part of it, from the most junior guy to the most senior guy. Because what you find out is, like, usually the most junior guy is kind of your tip of the spear. Like, they're on the nozzle, or at least like in the vicinity of the nozzle. They're making the push in. I'm feeding them hose, all that kind of stuff. And a lot of times in hot washes, it's just like whoever's got the biggest rank, the most seniority, they kind of do the bulk of the talking. But you got to make sure that you keep it to where everybody's opinion gets the same amount of time, the same amount of emphasis, because we all had different jobs on that fire ground, right? And just because you have, so you'll hear and you'll pick up on things sometimes where maybe that tip of the spear, that junior guy, is like, okay, this stuck out to me, this is really important. And that's an opportunity sometimes for you to check in and be like, ooh, he was keying in on, he was keying in on this, and really we want him keying in on something else. Like, hey buddy, that's not important, actually this is what's important. He's like, oh, okay, right? And so you're able to connect some of those dots. Or there's some things you're like, why did you do that? Why did you do this? And you've got some questions, and you're able to kind of hear his thought process. You're like, okay, no, that makes sense. And so another thing that my department has always done well since I got on was, they said, we kind of have this culture of, we really want trigger pullers and decision makers. Make a decision, just be able to have an explanation for it. Like, don't fire blind, right? And with that comes, it gets a little bit messy sometimes. Sometimes you're going to be wrong, but we're going to live with that, because we're going to help you learn from that. But overall, we prioritize decision makers, because decision makers, if you're comfortable pulling triggers, then you're going to be effective. And that's what we're there to do. So, make a decision, and then we'll follow up with the support and the hot wash afterwards of like, hey buddy, let's think about this next time, and then let's tweak it a little bit. Okay, Roger that, got it. And we're kind of like walking that shot in collectively as a group.
Yeah, empowering your people, particularly your company officers, to make those decisions is so important, and not just company officers, even your backsteppers too, because as you said, they may see something or they may hear something that you didn't, either because you were distracted by another task or the radio, or you just weren't in the vicinity to see or hear whatever they saw or heard, right? So that's very important, particularly from a command perspective. If a company officer doesn't feel like they have the ability to make their own decisions, because the incident commander is going to constantly nitpick them or second guess them and not support them in their decisions, then you're going to end up with a bunch of people that don't want to make decisions because they fear the repercussions, right? So I think that's very important to drive home. The point is, we want you to make a decision, whether you're a backstepper stretching that first line or you're a company officer. Go with the decision based on your experience and your training, and we'll talk about it, right? It's not you did it wrong. It's why did you didn't stretch the hose to the right place, and start off with one of those sort of statements that's going to put people back on their heels. It's, hey, explain to me your thought process. Why did you stretch the hand line to the basement instead of leaving it on, keeping it on the first floor? Those sorts of things, right? And then get their view. You may still know that they did the wrong thing, right? But you don't have to call them out from the beginning and say, hey, the fire was on the first floor. You shouldn't have gone to the basement. At least get their perspective, because they may know something or have a thought process that you're unaware of. So I think that's very valuable. And I've seen that go both ways. I've seen it where people were open-ended and understanding and accepting and working through that process. And then I've seen other officers and who, it was my way or the highway and you did it wrong and I don't really care what you think, right? And that second option really stifles thought and crushes people's confidence. So
it does.
It's really good. Let's see here. Questions. Let's talk a little bit about, we've kind of talked about normal versus abnormal fire conditions. You've hit on that a few times. But one thing you mentioned that I think is worth revisiting is the concept of exposures. And when we think about RECEO, the second letter is the E is for exposures, right? A lot of times we think about the house on either side or, something like that, or the garage in the alley, that sort of stuff. But we're not always talking about external exposures, right? We have internal exposures as well, which is, I don't know how long it's been around. It's not something that I would say that I was hearing people refer to interior exposures 10 years ago. I hear it more now, but just elaborate on that and the difference in the value of thinking about breaking things down, interior versus exterior exposures.
When, again, kind of getting back to how, it's not designed to be used as a linear checklist. This is a hierarchy that kind of builds your intuition to be able to look at a building that's on fire and know what is important about that. And so you kind of, the analogy that I use is ReCio. It's kind of like when you go to the eye doctor and they kind of flip those, is this better or is this better? And they kind of do that. And they flip those different lenses in front of you. You kind of look at that building on fire and you're like, critical life ways of the building, the rescue perspective, look at it through the rescue lens. And then you go, okay, flip. Now look at it through the exposure lens. Where's the fire? Where's it spreading? Where's it going? Right? That's kind of your next, filter that you look at it through. And this is happening within 5 seconds, that you're kind of looking at this building and you're being like, rescue life perspective. Okay, now exposures, where's the fire going? And then that instantly tells you, it dovetails into, that's how you cut it off, right? That's your confinement. And so like the exposure to confinement really just naturally kind of dovetails and follows. And it tells you, if you can look at a fire and go, here's where it's been, here's where it is, and here's where it's headed. If you can answer those three questions, you are going to be able to confine a fire. You're going to know, I need a line here, I need a line here, and I need a line there, right? And so with exposures, and this is where I think like UL has been really helpful with a lot of this stuff about, especially when they start getting the multifamily, like the built environment in a lot of our areas across most of the country, we have a lot of, wood frame, like exterior spread potential buildings. And so you have, in a house fire, you've got, how does fire, so this gets back to when you're talking about building construction with your people, it's not just the actual nuts and bolts of how does a building come together and how is it built, it's how does fire want to spread in these building types. So, hey, and we should all be able to look at a 1.5, 2.5 story house and go, hey, it's going to want to, start in the box, run the walls, get up into the knee walls. Here's where the knee wall voids run. This is how it's going to spread in that building, right? We should all be able to look at, something that's more platform construction, a newer house, so to speak, and look at and go, hey, it's going to want to leave the box. It'll spread the interior exposures, and then it'll jump out the window and it'll run the side of the building and, and into the attic. Okay, that's very predictable. Same thing with a garden style apartment, a center hallway apartment, where it's going to want to leave the box. It's going to go out into the hallway. It's going to spread the hallway. It also likes to run the side of the building, right? Garden style apartments with like breezeways. It's going to want to leave the box into the breezeway, run the side of the building, jump up into the attic, run the attic. And so it spreads very predictably in each one of these. Is it always that? No, not necessarily. But like Aaron Fields always talks about how work from probability to possibility, right? Start with your most likely and then work back from there. Well, with the interior exposure, the interior exposures are always on residential buildings a very high priority for us because those get into the common ways of the building that people, the lifelines, right? And the connective tissue of that building. And so when the fire leaves that bedroom and gets into the hallway and wants to run out into that family room, those are the interior exposures from that bedroom fire, right? Or that kitchen fire that starts in that more common area, that common kitchen that's attached to the living room that then wants to push down the hallway and overwhelm the bedrooms, right? So you kind of have to look at a fire and you go, is this interior seated in predominantly interior seated, or is it predominantly exterior seated, right? So like a back deck on fire that hasn't really punctured the membrane in the house yet, or something like that. You can kind of start there. Interior fire needs interior water, exterior fire needs exterior water. You don't like interior fire showing just like blowing out a window. That's not exterior fire, right? Exterior fire it is actively running the exterior of the building, right? Those are two different animals there. And so you kind of start walking your shot in a little bit from, that perspective of, is it predominantly interior, predominantly exterior? What is the exposure on the interior? And then I zoom out and I go, what is the exposure on the exterior? Right. So that's kind of how I look at it, is you got to zoom in and go the interior exposures where it's going to spread via the interior. And those are always going to take extremely high priority because that's the critical life ways of the building. Getting back to our RECEO, right? Or our R. And then, you zoom out and look at the rest of, what are my exterior exposures, if any? And that can kind of help with your follow up of, hey, can I knock this thing down, get a line on that exposure, get a line on that exposure, or knock this thing, start to, push that line and get to floor one. Well, my exposure was predominantly inside up that chimney, up that common stairwell, and it got up to floor 2. So my next line's going up to floor 2, right? And so when you look at it through the lens of what are the exposures, and the exposures meaning the common spread routes of that building predominantly first, and then I go to my exterior exposures, it just kind of makes it intuitive for how you need to plug lines in that building to be able to get confinement of that fire. You should know top floor apartment fire. Okay, well, I instantly have a attic exposure problem, right? And so that should key everybody in. My interior exposure is that common attic space. It's going to run that common attic. If we let it get a hold of that thing and we're behind the 8 ball on it, then we go from one unit being displaced to 120, like that. We burn the top off the place. So, is it running the side of the building to that where it's extending and my exposures are the units above and the attic? Okay, well, let's deal with that problem and plug lines in low to high, right? So that's kind of important to me to differentiate between interior and exterior exposures, not just leave exposures as the building next door. Because 9 times out of 10, that building next door it's irrelevant, right? 9 times out of 10, it's the fire building and the interior exposure problem that we have to get ahead of. So you're kind of forecasting how that fire moves through the building. You're telling the story of how that fire is going to move through the building. And then our confinement plan is basically to do that in reverse.
Yeah, you made a good point there, where it has been, where it is, and where it will be, or where it's going, right? So
yep.
That statement's very poignant and very important to think about, whether you're a company officer or you're a nozzle firefighter. So we've hit we've hit most of RECEO pretty good. The only the last part would be the overhaul part. Um, and you talk in your article about hydraulic ventilation, which um, typically takes place during the overhaul phase, as well as your extension checks. What are some common mistakes that you see to get made during that part of the fire that create issues for fire companies and headaches for battalion chiefs with rekindles and stuff like that?
Yeah, so it's important that you have a system for knocking down the fire and getting into overhaul. And the reason being is that you're kind of, everybody loves the part where we're engaged with the fire, we're fighting fire, we're having fun, we're crushing it, and then all of a sudden you put it out, and if everybody just starts high fiving, we're missing. There's a lot of meat left on the bone there,
Yeah,
and there's a lot of gaps that can be missed that end up causing us problems later on. And so it's really important that we have kind of this concrete like system, and ours, and just have one. I'm not saying you have to have our system, but you need to have some sort of a system. And ours is this. So we get it beat into our heads, and this predates my time at the Everett Fire Department by a lot, but uncle's vent. So make the fire say uncle, and then search the fire area, ventilate hydraulically, check for extension, notify command. So that is like it's just beat into us from day one. You make the fire room, boom, you call out fire room, you crush it all down, call for folks to bump up to search. While they're searching, you're going to start hydraulic ventilation. Yeah, you're going to find a window and start venting. And with hydraulic ventilation, people ask, like, how much do you hydraulically ventilate? You go, as much as you possibly can.
yeah,
Because you're the last one to appreciate your work on the nozzle. The building's going to clear out from far to near. It's all got to come through you. So while you're ventilating, you're sitting there thinking like, oh man, it's not really clearing up. Well, it is. And everywhere else in the building, it's just working its way towards you and out. So more, right? So Nozzleman's working on hydraulic vent. As me as a company officer, I would bump up and start searching, or call up a couple of the firefighters up the line, would tag team a little bit of a search there of the fire area. There's going to be other searches going on in different parts of the building as well, but we are responsible for the fire room or fire area that we push our nozzle into. So I'm searching, my nozzleman's ventilating, and then we do an extension check. And the extension check, again, our built environment is predominantly wood frame. We do, we've got some of our northern end companies are going to do a lot more brick and mortar, but my area is a lot more wood frame, like World War II era wood frame type stuff. And so for us, it's really important that we get the nozzle out the window to get water up the side of the building into the soffits, the eaves, the bird blocking, because fire is going to want to extend up that side of the building into the attic. So whether it's the top floor, whether we're on the bottom floor, anywhere in between, we're going to get the nozzle out, spray water up the side. We're going to get a little bit of opening, like just a hole big enough to get a nozzle into in the space above us in the fire room, and then we're going to go to the interior exposure, whatever space that is, the next space, and we're going to get a little opening there, get water up into that space, check for extension. We're not like starting to just pull ceiling a ton yet. We're just getting access holes so we can see, get water there. So if there is a little bit of fire going on, we can kind of buy us some time to get the truck company with the hooks and everything else to start really getting after it. But it allows us access and gets a little bit of water up in those spaces to kind of prevent things from taking off while we're getting the stuff down in the box actually hashed out. And then we're going to notify command, hey, we got the fire knocked out in 301. We're getting a search off of the apartment. We need X, Y, and Z, and here's our air. And like that kind of gets overlooked sometimes. Guys will just head down, be working. Well, the higher you are up in a building, or the bigger the building is, the longer it's going to take to get stuff to you, right? And so this is battalion chief. Like if I'm up in unit 504, and I say, oh hey chief, by the way, our bottles are dinging, and we need we need relief, you're like, oh shoot, like let's, it takes time, right? It's not a sim lab where you just say something and you snap your fingers and it's done. There's reflex time, the bigger the building is, to actually get things to you. So we want guys kind of having that reflexive, hey, here's what we got, here's what I need, and here's our air. So the battalion chief can plan accordingly to be able to, recycle them, or get them hooks to be able to, get them a truck company, whatever it is. But it's also important that that we do it early on, so that if I feel as an engine officer, all I know is what environment is in my immediate vicinity. If I tell my battalion chief, hey, we got a good knock on the fire, we're getting searches done, bang, 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 and he goes, I don't see it that way. Like, that's not what I'm seeing out here, right? You guys still have, active fire here, whatever. It's important that we key in on that early, so that the comparison of what I'm experiencing, what he's seeing out there, if those don't match up, we want to catch that as early as possible, so that we can reinforce, reposition, do something to get ahead of it. Because, if our heads are down and working, and he thinks our heads are down or working, and we're not matching up with that, then it's just going to delay the inevitable, which is, we've got a problem. We just haven't recognized it yet. So, and then, overhaul, when you get into overhaul is something I think you should take a lot of pride in as an engine company, especially, where that's like our finishing chef's kiss, or whatever you want to call it, on the fire. That's like our stamp of it's good. We say it's good. This is our, and like my family being in the trades and stuff like that, it's kind of something that was always ingrained in me all growing up, was, like being able to stand behind the quality of your work. And I think that overhaul is your ability to stand behind the quality of your work. So we're going to trim out the doors and the windows. We're going to check for extension in like the known routes that we're going to pull to clean material. We're going to hang out a little bit longer with the company just to make sure that there's no hot spots before we totally turn it over to the building. Like, there's a ton of stuff that we're going to do with overhaul, because we take pride in that also. We don't just take pride in putting the fire out and walking away. We take pride in the overhaul to make sure when we hand it back to the building owner that we go, hey, sorry this happened. There's no problem there. It's got our stamp of approval on it, and we're on to the next one.
No, great points. All great points, and I appreciate that. So we've made it all the way through RECEO. We've talked about a lot of different things. What are some things, or do you have anything in kind of wrapping things up, in conclusion? What else would you like to talk about with ReCio that we haven't hit yet, or thinks needs to be hit on a little harder?
I think that the biggest thing I can encourage people with is to analyze, like, what is built your framework that you operate in on the fire ground, right? And just kind of do some self scouting a little bit, and look at, what are the things that influence your decision making on the fire ground? Like, what is driving your decisions? In some places maybe with some guys, it's, what's driving their decision is, well, my battalion chief might want it this way or that way, or maybe it's that's really driving your decisions, which, can be good, but there's also some times where, they're not the ones that are pulling the trigger to start out all the time. It's, so you got to find your why, and you got to kind of analyze, like, and become a great decision maker, not based on what you think somebody else would want to do, but based on the scene that is presented to you that you're arriving to. That's your fire. And so you need to be able to have an ability to be able to look at it quickly within, 10 seconds, look at it and go, the most amount of good for the most amount of people and the most amount of property is going to be this. And then you make the call and your guys start going, right? And then you just kind of follow it up with this ongoing analyzation of what happened when I pulled the trigger on that? What happened when we put the line in place? What's going on? What's changing? What do we need to do now? Right. And so that process, that's kind of your framework that you're going to operate on when your brain is in those fast paced environments. And so, it doesn't have to be ReCio. I would be as strong of an advocate for that as anybody. And I do firmly believe that everybody can benefit from it. But if you have something that works, great. But just do some self scouting and try to pull that thread of, is what I'm using effective? Right. And if it feels clunky, if fires don't make a ton of sense to you, if you're feeling like you're kind of shooting from the hip when you're arriving to this stuff, or when you're thinking about arriving to this stuff, then, let's tear it back down and let's rebuild it with a different framework that's actually going to be useful for you, so that you can be effective and keep your people safe on the fire ground. So I think that's probably it starts with self scouting. That's probably one of the most important things. Where are my gaps, my vulnerabilities in my decision making? And then you've got to go and kind of attack those. And I really think that doing it through, especially a tactical decision game process, active hot wash and after action reviews, like all of that kind of stuff, it's just going to accelerate your learning so much faster.
Yeah, that's all really important. Great stuff. So Jay Bonnifield, if the audience wants to know more about you, wants to learn about the other classes you offer, where they can see you, obviously a little plug for Jay. He is going to be at FDIC this year presenting. So if you're there and you have the opportunity, I would highly recommend that you sit in on his class. But tell the audience, anything you want to about yourself, how to get a hold of you, classes you're teaching, all those sorts of things.
Yeah. No, I appreciate it. Yeah. So, Jonathan Brumley and I, he's a lieutenant out in Denver, and John and I have been doing a class on apartment fires and so that class has been something that's really taken off and had a lot of fun with it, called the multifamily framework. And it's been a blast. I mean, I love that, I think in the fire service, there's a lot of, stuff about house fires, and, then you kind of there's a lot of stuff like high rise is pretty well covered and all that, but there's, 5-story wood frame center hallways that just about everybody has in their areas. Like there's just, those aren't those things. And so, that's something that, John and I have definitely sought out, just trying to really hone in on these, from the townhome to, the 3-story garden style to kind of, the podium, some of the new podium stuff that's being built, really just try to provide really good information on those buildings, because that's a lot of what that is what a lot of our areas fire duty wise are shifting towards. And so not treating them like a big house fire, because they're not, it is really important. So that's John and I have been having a blast with the multifamily framework. I'll be doing anatomy of an engine company for FDIC, and that's kind of been, like I was talking about with you off air, where I started out when I was on tailboard with anatomy of a push, and as I promoted and all that kind of stuff, I kind of moved it to now it's a more holistic look at engine company tactics as a whole. And that class is never the same twice. Like it's where I'm at and what I'm learning about, what I'm using, what I'm doing. That's where I'm at currently with what with engine company operations. It's just a awesome opportunity for me to be able to just talk about where I'm at with engine company operations. So that class is a lot of fun. But yeah, that's kind of what I do. I'm not super active on social media. I have Facebook. It's easy to reach me on there. My email me anytime at mjbonnifield@gmail.com. That's kind of my, I always laugh because guys, when I go teach somewhere at different conferences or whatever, I've had the comment a number of times about how guys will go, boy, you're really hard to reach. You're almost like non-existent on the, because I don't have social media, a ton of that or anything. And so if you have trouble reaching out, like get at me on Facebook or email, and I'll do my best to respond. in a timely fashion, but sometimes I'm a little slow because we got a lot of kids. So
Yeah, I can appreciate that. Yeah, I appreciate
yeah,
that. Well, Jay, I really appreciate you coming on the show this month. Been a pleasure. We could have talked way longer about ReCio, obviously, but I think we covered a lot, and so I think we'll wrap it up there. All right. So on
yeah.
behalf of Fire Engineering, the Fire Engineering Network, Chief Dave Rhodes, Diane Rothschild, this is Eric Dryman signing off for the March episode of the Hooks and Hoses podcast. Everybody take care, and we'll see you at